Welcome everyone to this week's Big 12 preview. We're in week 6 of the college football season and the first full week of conference play in the Big 12. We're going to get started on Thursday night, a marquee matchup in the North Divisional race. Missouri hosts Nebraska in what could be a game that sets a standard for the leader in the Big 12 North. Missouri and Nebraska both coming off weeks. They've had time to prepare for this game. Nebraska, we know their story thus far. 3 wins over Sun Belt teams, a Sun Belt team that did pretty good last week in a game against Iowa and Arkansas State, but nonetheless 3 Sun Belt teams. Their one loss, a high-profile one at Virginia Tech in Blacksburg, a game Nebraska was in till the end. Tyrod Taylor pulled off some magic. That's the Huskers' one loss on the year. Their one loss at Virginia Tech, they limited Tech to 278 yards. This defense is extremely good. This will by far be the best defense that Missouri and their young quarterback Blaine Gabbert have seen so far this season. The defense has not surrendered more than 300 yards since week 1 against Florida Atlantic. That's for the Huskers. Key matchup for me is going to be the quarterback. I know it's stating the obvious, but I think whatever quarterback performs better in this game is going to get their team a win. You're talking about Blaine Gabbert, the freshman from Missouri. He's performed well so far. He can throw the ball. He can also run. He's performed in a pressure situation against Illinois in the Dome in St. Louis, not as much as Virginia Tech. Zach Lee, on the other hand, for Nebraska. He struggled at Virginia Tech. 2 interceptions, no touchdown passes. This will be a pressure situation on national TV. If he does not respond well, Missouri's going to win this football game. And I think the key thing in that and helping those 2 quarterbacks is going to be the running game. Whatever running back has a more high-profile game and takes pressure off their quarterback might be the key to this one. So watch for Roy Haley Jr. from Nebraska and Derek Washington from Missouri. Whatever back has a better game, calms their quarterback down, and they don't make mistakes is going to win this game. Ultimately, I think Nebraska's defense is extremely good, but I have doubts in their offense. I'm going to pick an upset here. I think Missouri beats Nebraska in Columbia behind an extremely solid game from their quarterback, Blaine Gabbert. Another Big 12 team that had an off week last week, the Oklahoma State Cowboys. They're going to open their conference schedule at Texas A&M. A&M, of course, they're coming off an embarrassing loss to Arkansas, 47-19 last week in Arlington. Oklahoma State, the bye week was key because it let them get healthy. They should have all their weapons back. Quarterback Zach Robinson, wide receiver Des Bryant, and running back Kendall Hunter should be good to go for Oklahoma State. This is a big game for Texas A&M. If you beat Oklahoma State in a high-key home matchup, you gain a lot of momentum back and make some people quiet a little bit about the last week's loss to Arkansas. If they don't, this could be a trip to the cellar of the Big 12 South Division for A&M. I think the loss of this game could have that big of consequences. Oklahoma State will win in an offensive shootout. A&M has got to limit Oklahoma's possession time and control the ball offensively on their side. If they try to get in a shootout, they do not have the weapons to compete with Oklahoma State, and the Cowboys will win that game. Jared Johnson, obviously the key to that ball control. Last week he got flustered. After a good 10-0 start on Arkansas, they fell apart. He was pressured and did not do so well. Oklahoma State's pressure on Jared Johnson is going to be the key to that. If their defensive front causes his problems and disrupts him, look for Oklahoma State to win this game easily in College Station. Last week, a heartbreaker for the Iowa State Cyclones. They lose 24-23 to Kansas State after a blocked extra point when they'd scored with 30 seconds left in the game to what they thought would be sending it to overtime. Last year, they almost upset their opponent this week, the Kansas Jayhawks, the other team from Kansas. They got them in Ames last year. This year's going to be a different story, and here's why. Last week, Iowa State's defense gave up some big marquee plays to Kansas State, including a 54-yard touchdown to eventually let the Wildcats take the lead. KU's weaponry is better than Kansas State. Quarterback Todd Reesing, experience, 2 good receivers in Briscoe and Meyer. Look for them to have a big game, and here's why. I think the running game sets the pace. Look for the Jayhawks to use an aggressive running attack behind freshman Tobin Opurum. They're going to set a standard much like Iowa did against the Cyclones when they controlled the ground game, opened up the quarterback, threw the ball down the field, and beat them 35-7 for the Cyclones' only loss on the season. I see a very similar game in this. Opurum, Jake Sharp should be back for Kansas. 2 good running backs. I think they set the pace, and I think KU wins this game fairly easily down the stretch. Next game we're going to look at, Baylor visits Oklahoma. In the case of the Oklahoma Sooners, a lot of things have went wrong this season. Saturday night, they lose to Miami in South Florida, and more importantly, they suffer another devastating injury. This team has lost almost every high-profile offensive weapon they had. Sam Bradford out, Jermaine Gresham, their tight end, out for the year, and the latest one, Ryan Broyles, hurt on the second play from scrimmage. Their big threat wide receiver has a fractured shoulder, going to be out at least 2 weeks. Even if Sam Bradford is ready to come back this week and replace Landry Jones that started for Oklahoma, the concern for them right now is an offensive weapon at wide receiver. Cameron Kinney or Brandon Caleb are going to have to step up for Oklahoma, or teams are going to figure out they can't stretch the field. They're going to hone in on their good running backs, and it's going to be a long year for Oklahoma. Baylor on the other side of the ball, they got injury concerns of their own. They lost Robert Griffin for the year. Last week, though, a third-string quarterback, Nick Florence, performed very admirably in a win over Kent State. Baylor has a good defense. They got the big guy up front in Phil Taylor, they got Joe Pollock, and they got Jordan Lake back at safety. If Oklahoma tries to set back and control the game with their running backs, Baylor can stay in this game a lot longer than people think they can. But ultimately, without Robert Griffin, I do not know that Baylor has the offensive dynamic to outscore Oklahoma, even without their high-profile wide receivers. I look for Oklahoma to win this game, but I think it'll be a lot closer score than a few people think. Next game we're going to look at, Colorado visits Texas. For Dan Hawkins and the Buffaloes, not a real pleasant start to the Big 12 Conference slate if you had to pick an opponent. Colorado's struggling right now mightily. They have one win on the season. They've been embarrassed in their other losses. They got absolutely shredded on the ground last week at West Virginia. Things are not going to get much better in Austin this week. Last time out, Texas looked as good as they've looked all year in a win over UTEP, which you may not think as much until UTEP destroyed Houston last week to give the Cougars their first loss on the year. I think regardless of whether Colt McCoy struggles out the gate like he has in a few games this year, the Colorado defense is going to be in trouble. Texas has too many offensive weapons. And after Noel Devine from West Virginia shredded Colorado last week, look for the Texas running backs to have a big game. Trey Newton and Cast, I think, will run for a lot of yardage right there, set up the passing game. West Virginia drilled Colorado last week for 257 yards on the ground. Things are not going to get much better for Dan Hawkins and the Buffaloes. I think Texas wins this game big behind a strong running game. Last game we're going to look at right here, the one in Lubbock Saturday night featuring Kansas State and Texas Tech, 6 o'clock game on Fox Sports regional telecast. Kansas State's Bill Snyder pulled off another trick last week, starts quarterback Grant Gregory in place of Carson Coughlin with little to no warning against Iowa State at Kansas City. He leads them to a 24-23 win after the blocked field goal extra point that we talked about earlier. This is a better quarterback for Bill Snyder's system. Gregory can use his feet to open up additional plays. He ran for good yardage last week. He will admit that he runs more to get open to pass than he does to run for yardage, but still a better quarterback for Snyder's system than Carson Coughlin was. Kansas State has a good talent base now. This is a different dynamic for the Wildcats than what people have seen all year because of Gregory starting at quarterback. They've got an outstanding running back in Daniel Thomas, the junior college transfer, a quarterback last year at the JC ranks, a good running back this year, lets them do a lot of different things. Wildcat formation, no pun intended. He can also throw the ball, a dangerous weapon for them. And at the wide receiver, Brandon Banks, one of the more dangerous people in America, an undersized receiver, but he has burnt people all year long, including a 54-yard touchdown last week against Iowa State that eventually led to the defeat of the Cyclones. They got Lamarck Brown, a big wide receiver, running back last year, can create matchup problems for smaller cornerbacks. Texas Tech, they have some concerns right now. The number one for me is they gave up 431 yards last week to New Mexico. You saw the game. There was times the Lobos, which came into the game with absolutely terrible offensive stats, were able to drive down the field on Texas Tech and cause them problems and score points. With K-State and their new dynamic, this worries me against the Red Raiders defense. Tech will need a solid game out of whatever quarterback starts. Taylor Potts, alleged to have a concussion. If he's not ready to go, Steven Sheffield, the backup, who came in last week, performed very well against New Mexico. A couple mistakes, but led a nice drive at the end of the first half, led 3 consecutive possessions for scoring in the second half. The Tech running game is going to have to set the pace in this one, and here's why. Kansas State's defense is very good. They have not allowed a 200-yard passer this season. Granted, Texas Tech's going to be a passing attack a little bit better than what they face, but still, this defense knows how to apply pressure, and their cornerbacks and safeties have done a really nice job. Texas Tech's going to have to assert the running game. They're going to have to go back to Harrison Jeffers, who you saw have a brilliant game last week against New Mexico. Baron Batch is going to have to contribute too. They're going to have to take some pressure off Sheffield if he starts and allow that game to get off to a good start. Let Kansas State worry a little bit more about the run and opening up the passing attack that Texas Tech is so good at. The key for Texas Tech, I think, rests on special teams. They've done a nice job this year under new special teams coach. Kansas State will absolutely murder you on special teams if you're not careful. Brandon Banks, one of the most dangerous return men in America, he's returned 2 kickoffs for a touchdown in a game this season absolutely have to contain him, kick away from him if necessary. They cannot let Kansas State burn them on special teams. You saw them block an extra point last week. They've done it a bunch during the Bill Snyder era. Texas Tech cannot let that game come down to a special teams error or it will cost them. As for picking this game, I think it's a very dangerous game to pick. After the yardage New Mexico racked up on Texas Tech last week and the fact that we don't know what quarterback's going to start for Texas Tech, I think it's a highly dangerous game to pick. I would not be surprised at all if Bill Snyder and Kansas State come to Lubbock Saturday night and upset Texas Tech. He's done it before in his career. He prepares well. A very veteran coach knows how to get it done. I think ultimately Texas Tech's going to pull this one out behind a strong performance from Stephen Sheffield if he starts. But Kansas State is a dangerous opponent. I think this is going to be a very exciting game Saturday night in Lubbock. That's going to do it for our Week 6 look at the Big 12 Conference, the first full week of conference play. For the Lubbock Avalanche-Journal, I'm Zach Long.